This is chess. Well, not quite, I'll explain in just a moment, but today we're adding 5 brand new moves, each one wilder than the last. You've probably heard of atomic chess, where each capture explodes a 3x3 area. That's nothing new. But what if I told you, by the end of this video the same idea would be turned into something a little more volatile and a lot more strategic. You see, I'm building Chess2, a full chess website where anarchychess makes the rules, and once you've seen what those rules look like, you'll wish you didn't. So let's start with the first move, vertical castling was allegedly a loophole in the FUDE rulebook. If your king hasn't moved and your rook hasn't moved, you can castle. Then what happens if your king hasn't moved and your king's pawn just promoted to a rook? So now your king hasn't moved and your brand new rook hasn't moved. Does that mean you can castle vertically? Well, unfortunately not. I actually looked into this, and the first rulebook specifically says the king and the rook have to be on the same
Même traverse.
Now, I don't know any bit of French, but that apparently means they have to be on the same rank. Unfortunately for them, I literally could not care less, and if anarchychess wants it allowed, it will be allowed. But this was just the first rule of 5. Somehow things just get weirder from here. Up next is king. This comes from this post. Actual rule my dad taught me as a kid. If the king's touch, it's an instant draw, which honestly is oddly wholesome. Don't read the comments of this post, you might just accidentally become a Ras dev, be careful. This rule is simple, elegant, beautiful, really stupid and almost completely strategically irrelevant. But maybe there's something wrong with me. There's definitely something wrong with me, because I find this really funny, so I just had to add it, I'm sorry. Okay, so this rule was just really stupid, but the next rule is where things start to get really interesting. We've moved from the cool but dumb category into the actually kinda powerful and slightly terrifying category. Meet the By the way, if you want to hang out, discuss Chess2 and see what's coming next early, I made a Discord server, the link in the description. The omnipotent pawn comes from when someone paired ChatGPT against Stockfish, the stronger chess engine. This went as well as you think. ChatGPT did not in fact play by the rules. For example, it just captured his own bishop while castling, which by the way is totally legal in Chess2, and that's not exactly how the knight moves. But one thing really stood out and kept coming back, the omnipotent pawn on f6. I don't know why, but I think this is hilarious. Like, there is just a mine on the f6 square. What did he do? Of course, the same thing goes for the f3 square for white. But I do think it's a little bit too powerful that you can just summon new pawns at will, so I made it so the omnipotent pawn can only be summoned if the last move was a capture on that square. Also, our board is 10 by 10, so instead of f3 and f6, the omnipotent pawns appear on h3 and h8. This one actually comes really handy and can lead to some really cool traps. Up next is where things begin to go nuclear, and very painful to make. Meet the queen. Yes, this is exactly as absurd as it sounds. This comes from this watch, which has unfortunately been removed, but luckily someone compiled all the weird anarchy chess rules into a single post, and this gem was included. If a queen is on either end of an otherwise vacant rank, it may undergo radioactive beta decay and send a pawn, bishop and rook to the opposite side. The pawn produced cannot be promoted to a queen. Okay, so I have a couple of problems with this rule. First, why does the queen need to be exactly on the end of the rank? Like, actually, is this some kind of physics parody I dropped out of school too early to understand? Please let me know. Second, I don't like that the pawn can't promote, because then, like, what's the point of this move? And let's just say I regret having that thought. You see, there is a reason the pawn can promote to a queen. If it could, you will just create infinite pieces. Also, being able to right away promote the pawn to a queen is overpowered. But of course, instead of accepting that, my first thought was, okay, it's a fix. I'll just make it so the pawn has to move the length of the board before promoting again. This way, you have to give your opponent a chance to stop you first. Except, this just doesn't solve the infinite pieces problem. So then I thought, fine. What if the pawn can only promote once both the bishop and the rook its pawn with have been captured? But that would mean some moves aren't obvious by just looking at the board. Like, how is someone supposed to know if this pawn can promote without knowing the move history? So naturally, my next terrible idea was to make new piece types. Radiated rook, radiated bishop, radiated pawn, so you could tell if the pawn could promote. That would work, sure, but now I've just invented 3 extra pieces that exist purely to fix a rule some guy made up 3 years ago. Way too overcomplicated. Then I realized I'm an idiot. Like, actually, there's something wrong with me. The rule says it can promote to a queen, specifically a queen. So obviously making it able to promote to any other piece type except a queen would immediately solve all of our problems. I have no idea why I didn't think of that earlier. It literally said that in the rule. There's still something I want to change about this rule to make it better, but for that we have to talk about our next rule. We'll come back to better decay in just a moment, but first, hear me out, Nook. This one also forced me to get creative. The original post said if a knight moves to a square with a rook, it becomes a nook. Except in my variant, the nook is stronger than a knight but weaker than a rook. So why would anyone ever do that? You're literally just trading material for less material. Fun fact, the nook in my variant is based on the first ever mention of a nook in history from a 1996 science fair project, which I think is pretty cool. Okay, how do we make this actually worth it? Wait, fusion. What if nuclear fusion just exploded the 3x3 area around it? I think this gives the nuclear fusion a really cool and strategic value, where sure, you're losing material, but this can be very powerful if used correctly. Which brings us back to the queen beta decay. What if we keep the pawn as not being able to promote to a queen, but instead of spawning a rook and a bishop, we spawn in a rook and a knight. This way you can turn your queen into a bomb and get an extra pawn for it that can promote to any other piece type except the queen. I think it's a good deal. Oh, and since this is an actual chess website and not just a collection of bad ideas, I also wrote on some website related stuff since last time. The homepage finally exists. There is now a guide page for all the weird new pieces and rules, and you can now rematch and send direct challenges. By the way, funny story, you see this icon for incoming challenges? Yes, so the icon library I used didn't have a sword. So that's actually an eyedropper. Close enough, let's just keep this our little secret. And one last thing, as a small tribute to Daniel Raudisky who recently passed, I've changed the board colors to blue and white, the board theme he always used. Rest in peace, Daniel.